Hey, what's going on? It's Scott, and this video is all about addressing one of the biggest stressors that police officers have right now. They don't feel supported because there's a lack of leadership in so many departments. Fortunately, during my career, I worked with and was led by a lot of good leaders, but there were also those micromanagers. I was also exposed to those people who are in the rank for themselves and what they could do and all that kind of stuff. Never about how they can make the officers better in the performance of their duties. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to interview Nick Ruggiero, who was exposed to a lot of adversity within his police department to the point where he became suicidal. That's right. He was going to kill himself because he felt so alone. I know other police officers are going through it. This is something that needs to be addressed. And heck, this interview is extensive, but we have discussions about real things that really need to be talked about. Heck, we even present solutions on how to interact when you encounter First Amendment auditors. All right. You don't want to miss this. And if you want to listen to the audio version, then there's a link below to the podcast episode. Let's get right to it. Look at that studious background you got.
You like that? That's like, like I'm a educated, professor, but not the case.
It's all the books you have written come the year 2050. Love it.
All equaling $20.
Right. You're only full of controversy because you're just calling things out for the way they are, and some people just don't want to acknowledge that.
I think that's the big thing is people hear the stuff and they're so, in our profession, they're so used to, hey, you can't say that. You can't say that in roll call. Hey, you can't say that about the commanders. Hey, you can't say that. And that's the reason why our profession isn't changing. It's not changing at all.
And
I think that scares people.
And I've got some things I want to bring up from your Police Mental Barricade Volume 2, but I think in that book you did mention about that. Basically, your First Amendment right is squashed.
Gone.
Yeah.
And I've got people that I'll do a show or they'll write in or they'll put on social media like that's not true. And I'm like, okay, test it out. Go into roll call and tell them, hey, listen, I'm not happy about the cruiser that I've been assigned. Let's test it out. Do that. Start small. And to us in law enforcement, that's not small. See what happens. See if you're going to get a new cruiser. See what happens. And that's the test of whether or not you have your First Amendment right. And that's something so beyond minuscule. When you start talking about having a social media account outside of law enforcement, even physical fitness, there are tons of cops now that are big into physical fitness. They're trying to build their physical fitness business outside of work. And they're just posting videos of themselves like working out, giving health tips. Hey, don't do this, do this. And they're getting creamed by the people on the top floor, where they're like, hey, you need to be cautious about having this account because you don't know who's going to see it. Who's going to see it? Are they going to put this in a trial? Is a defense attorney going to use me doing physical fitness in a trial for DUI or a murder? Is that what you're? I mean, I don't understand the correlation of don't have a social media account or limit your social media presence as a cop. Now, if you're on there and you're doing stupid stuff, if you're on there and you're talking about political views, there's a level of common sense when it comes to that. You need to remain fair and impartial. You obviously can't do a roll call room podcast while you're a cop. I learned that the hard way. Mm-hmm. Mostly because you can't get on a podcast and turn around and go, hey, the reason why everything's so screwed up in law enforcement is that the majority, not all of them, the majority of our law enforcement leaders have an identity crisis right now. Mm-hmm. They don't know who their master is. They don't know who their customer is. They think that the public is their only customer, but they don't understand that there's an internal customer that they're not satisfying. And people aren't signing up to not be cops because of the pay, although the pay is terrible. That's not the only reason why they're not signing up. They're doing our younger generation, our 21 to 27-year-old generation right now is tech savvy. They're going on and doing research. They're going on and looking at articles posted about the law enforcement agency that they're applying for. They're actually physically going out and talking to cops on the street of the agency that they're applying to and saying, hey, if you can go back in time, would you apply for this department? And your internal customer is your worst recruiter. because they're saying to these prospective recruits, don't come here. Don't. If I can go back and do it all over again, I wouldn't work at this agency. And you have a customer service, you have an identity crisis going on within law enforcement.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Man. All right. Well, you know what? We've already started. Let's just roll with it.
Yeah.
I did want to say that, all right, my first year, I started out in my hometown department. And I mean, I had literally dreamed about working there. I felt so called to work there, passionate about working there. And I really enjoyed when I was in high school interning there. And then finally I get on in 2007. And Nick, not even 2 years into it, I quit. I went and worked at another department. But I got in with a group of negative police officers, and everything was, for some of them, everything in their personal life was spiraling out of control. So therefore, they let that roll into work, and they were just, this place is awful. Da, 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 da. Hindsight's always 2020. Looking back, they were just miserable about what was going on in their personal life. And I also just got in with some that no matter what the department did, it just made them miserable. I realized when I went to another department, I left for all the wrong reasons. I just left because others had negative emotions. However, when I got back, because the hometown department did take me back, thank goodness, and I worked there for 11, 12 years afterwards, I never looked at things the same. However, there were still the micromanagers, the toxic people, that it's there. It's just all in a matter of perspective. So going forward, I don't want anyone to think that you and I or other police officers who are talking about, like, particularly the things you do, are just naive and negative. No. If you have factual based evidence of poor leadership, then yeah, it needs to be addressed. Now, to anyone who's new to law enforcement or you're thinking about getting into it, you have to be careful to guard your heart and mind from getting sucked into negativity, because things could be going pretty well. And you'll realize you have to focus on things you can control. And one thing that really helped me when it came to the micromanagers was, don't put expectations on them. Like, if you come into work and say, oh, hopefully they'll help me out with this. No, they're micromanagers. So
no. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I get that a lot with the books and with role of the podcast, which is that, you know, it comes off you're a very disgruntled ex-employee. And I can tell you, anybody that worked with me when I was a cop, I was a sergeant, I always toted the department flag. I was always the big advocator, the big recruiter. So it was only until I went through what I went through with poor law enforcement leadership and struggling with mental health, where I started to really do my research and understand that the suicide epidemic within law enforcement back in years past was people's home life. Like you said, it was people brought their home life. It was finances. It was relationship issues. It was custody issues. It was a lot of that stuff. The tides have completely changed, where, you know, law enforcement leadership has over an 80% reason why most law enforcement officers are killing themselves, because they put so much into that job, and they have put so much faith in these leaders, and they've been wrong so much that asking for help is a huge stigma. It still is.
Yeah, it
you
is.
know, it is attached to so much that comes with it. And I think where that happened, where the spotlight has been brought on, was kind of our Ferguson / COVID years.
Yeah,
where we had a lot of peacetime leaders that were in wartime. And when I say wartime, I'm not talking about we're going out there and, you know, we're putting riot gear on and we're slapping people and stuff. But what I'm talking about is wartime, meaning we've got the anti-police movement, we've got mental health crisis, we've got recruitment crisis. Oh, now we're in COVID, where we have to figure out how we solve crime without actually being interactive with the public. And then the pendulum has swung with the anti-police movement, where departments are now looking at, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is it really worth going out there and stopping people and getting guns off the street and drugs off the street? Is it worth it? And those are the leaders that are peacetime. They came up in the ranks. They took processes to get promoted during peacetime. There was nothing going on. it was a happy time. Everybody loved the police. It was, post 9/11, you couldn't go into a coffee shop and pay for coffee. Now we're in wartime. Now we're in crisis. And those peacetime commanders are lost. They don't know how to react because they've never been put in that situation. And instead of admitting and saying, "Hey, listen, I'm not good at this. Like, I need to broaden my skills." Maybe pick up a book, maybe take some leadership training. They're not doing that. It's almost the quite opposite. They've turned it inward, and they're micromanaging their officers to a level where the morale and the recruitment issues are at a crisis. And it's not just where I live, it's where you are. It's across the nation. The amount of emails that I get from folks that listen to my podcast and read my books, they're like, the same thing that happened to you at my department's happening at my department. Like, this is crazy. And I'm like, you're not alone. You're not alone.
Yeah.
A lieutenant so and so is in Ohio. He's in California. He's in Florida. They're all around the place. Like, and the problem is that your show, which highlights it, my show, which highlights it, they're not watching those shows, unfortunately. Or if they are watching them, they flip it and they're like, "Oh, Scott and Nick are just disgruntled. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to them."
No,
I hear it all the time.
Yeah, no, I I have no like beef with where I work. I have beef with people that proclaim to be leaders, and they never made me better. They never made
No.
me or any other officer better. That's a leader when you put traits into people, or as I heard General Colin Powell once said, uh, a good leader is someone who can get people to follow them out of curiosity. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't come across that enough in law enforcement, but the ones that I did, like the actual leaders, man, I would follow them and ask them the questions and get advice from them. And the other ones, I would do what they told me. Don't get me wrong. I'm not telling anyone to be insubordinate, but I would do what they would tell me. And then that's it. I wouldn't put any value in their opinion or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, I go around, I do speaking engagements like you, and when I'm in a room of leaders, which is always fun because I always feel like I should wear SWAT gear, because I'm saying things that they don't want to hear,
Right.
and I start off with what makes a good leader, what makes you a good leader, and I'll get answers, which is I take good care of my people, or I manage very well, or just baseline answers or low scope answers. And I'm like, would your definition of being a good leader is elevating future leaders? Like, that should be your mindset of a good leader, of successional command. Like, if you as a leader, like when I left law enforcement as a sergeant, of all the things that I did as a sergeant, the thing that I'm most proud of is having 19 officers promoted to the rank of sergeant underneath me.
Wow.
That's an accomplishment.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
awesome.
huge accomplishment.
Yeah, that's great.
I can't, I have hundreds of examples of where I took good care of my people, where I stuck up for them during internal investigations and stuff like that. That's all great. That's all fine. That's part of your job. But if you want to truly be a leader, like you said, getting them to follow out of curiosity, or, understanding that you don't know everything. Once your troops understand that you don't know everything, and I've worked for people, and I'm sure you have too. I've worked for people who know everything. They know everything. They'll tell you that they know everything, and in reality, they don't know everything.
Right.
And it ruins your credibility because you're like, well, I know the answer to that. Okay, and 9 times out of 10, it's the wrong answer. But you know what? The effort is there. The effort is
Right.
there. But I mean, I circle back, which is, I think law enforcement in general has a huge identity crisis right now, which is that they don't know where the pendulum is swinging. They don't know whether or not they should be out dancing with the public and doing cookouts, or they should be doing crime prevention and locking people up. And there's such a disconnect between the rank and file and command staff right now, where if you ask the rank and file, of course they want to go out and they want to go lock people up. And then you ask command staff and they're like, well, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So how do you get to the middle? How do you figure it out? And there's just such a huge disconnect, and it's at every agency that I talk to. It's the same thing. They don't know how to tackle the rising crime that's happening, or they do know, and they're being told don't do it because they don't want to wind up on, CNN and with a riot. So I don't envy the position that law enforcement is in right now, but I also know that if it doesn't change soon, the crisis for recruiting will be at a level that we will not be able to get back at. We're pretty close now. Even the caliber that we are hiring right now is scary. It's very, very scary to me. When we're dipping into the 45-year-old plus, I got some concerns. I got some major concerns, because that means we're running out of space. We're running out of candidates, and it's not an age thing. I don't want anybody to think that I've know a lot of folks that are over 40 years old that can outrun me and do all that stuff. But I will tell you that is a dangerous road that you're going down, because the amount of mental toll that it takes on you and the physical toll it takes on you. I wouldn't do that job at 45 years old.
Right.
I just wouldn't do it.
Yeah. No, there's a retired officer that I know. He said, people getting into it later in life. He's not knocking it entirely, but he's like, over time, you'll find out it's a young man's game. Patrol is. It really is.
Big time. Especially now, like, you're going to be running more. You're going to need to be more physically fit. I mean, you need to defend yourself, especially now.
Yes.
Right or wrong, what it looks like on TikTok or any other social media account is besides the point. You want to go home at night. And speaking from somebody that I've been, and I'm sure you have as well. I've been in struggles to keep my weapon in my holster before, and I was in my 30s when that happened. Can I do that now? I know my physical capability, and the answer to that is maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. That's not a gamble that I'm willing to take.
Right.
That's just not something that I'm willing to take. And I just think that departments right now, they're trying to be innovative. They're trying to think outside of the box, and they're trying to be inclusive, and they're trying to do all this stuff. But you're not thinking longevity. You're not thinking 20, 25-year officers.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said it a couple of times on different shows, and it's very controversial, and a lot of people don't agree with it, which is you're going to have to start changing the retirement time. You're going to have to you need to get out of this mindset of 20, 25-year officers. You need to get that out of your head. You're going to need to devise a pension plan for 10 to 15-year officers, because you're dealing with the Generation X and millennial generation, which we already know that they don't stay they're not longevity officers. So
Yeah.
figure out a plan to keep them. 10-year retirement at however much percentage, 15-year percentage, whatever it is, because statistics show us that officers are not staying past 15 years now.
Right. Yeah.
So,
no, you bring up a good point.
So shift it.
Heck, the state where I worked, 30 years for full retirement. 30 years. It's ridiculous.
Nobody's doing that.
And we all know the statistic that they live the average of 57 years old.
Yep.
Yeah. That's so sad. You put your whole life into something, and literally some unfortunately give it all, as in the sense of you're killed on duty, the ultimate sacrifice. But those who survive it, it's like, you don't survive much longer. It's not right, in my opinion. It's not logical at all. I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to dive into your book here, volume 2 of Police Mental Barricade. The first book I enjoyed very much. And for anyone listening or watching who's never read Nick's books, they're very brief. They're very to the point, kind of like mine. I know we have short attention spans, and but you want to pack in a lot in a short amount of time. And Nick is like a master at that. So
double spaced.
Double spaced. Yes. But if we could, I'd like to start at the first book where you pointed out that, there's trauma from external events, like seeing the dead child, or heck, even having to investigate a child being a victim of a horrific crime. Of course, that takes a toll on you. But there's a lot of stress, anxiety, heck, depression that can happen because there's not a good network of relationships, to include inside a department. And Nick, without giving everything away from your first book, it did get very bad for you regarding that toxicity you were exposed to. Can you open up a little bit about that? Because we really need to understand how bad it can get for some people.
Sure. So, I worked at a department for a good period of time, 17 years, and I love that place. Like I had every T-shirt, man. I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I was the sergeant of community policing. I did cookouts, I did the holiday events. I was in it, man. And it just got to the point where it got so toxic in my department that I decided to leave. And I didn't want to. And after 2 weeks of leaving, I asked to come back. And the chief at the time was like, yeah, you can come back. And we didn't have a good exit interview. I will give that caveat. It was not good.
Yeah.
So when I called him and ate a big humble pie. And he said to me, yeah, come on back and, we'll take you back and, you'll come back at what you were at. And that wasn't the case. He lied and they stripped me of my rank. They stripped me of pay. And to embarrass me, they put me back in patrol. They made me go through field training all over again. And it drove me to try and kill myself. And when I did that, I started to look around and see what resources were out there or who else was talking about this stuff. And at the time, nobody was doing it.
Right.
And so I started a podcast, and this podcast overnight just blew up. I mean, it just was, 6,000 people the first time. And then it got to like 25, 30,000 people listening to it. And I was like, oh my God, I'm onto something, And I started to notice every time I went to work, things started to change. And it started to change in a negative way. I started to see that police reports that I put in were being looked at multiple times. Things that I put in for, like I put in to go to Vice Narcotics, I was turned down. And the two people that got it over me had 2-3 years on the job and had never made a drug arrest, which just blew me away. And I was still super naive to think there was no way that the police department would retaliate. Like, just, I believe in law and order. I believe in, the right thing to do. And slowly but surely, next thing I knew, I was under investigation for stealing. And for me, I was like, I thought it was comical when I first found out about it. I laughed.
I mean, heck, you were the guy that you mentioned in the first book. You were the guy that spent your own money towards certain community things. You were that guy.
Thousands of dollars. I owned a DJ company, an entertainment company, photo booth, and DJ company. I would go into the community and spend thousands of my own dollars. My equipment would be stolen in the projects. I mean, it was bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
So I was sitting in II having Miranda read to me. And I was like, I actually laughed at the captain who was interviewing me. And eventually, at that moment, I realized, Nick, you're not coming out of this. Like, you're not going to be a cop at the end of this. And I basically said to the captain, I was like, I know that this is retaliation from the podcast. And he was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, just do what you're going to do. Like, there's no point. And ultimately what wound up happening was I resigned in lieu of termination because I knew what was coming. They charged me at first with theft, and then they downgraded it to misuse of city property and found me guilty of that and untruthfulness. And if you know anything about being in law enforcement, the moment that you're found guilty by II of untruthfulness, you can't testify in court anymore. So they ruined my law enforcement career. And I was depressed, and I had already tried to kill myself once before. And, I was going to therapy. I had started therapy when that happened. And my therapist was like, hey, you got to sit and journal about this. And I'm not journaling. It's like, I'm not a writer. I'm not a 16-year-old girl. I'm not going to, journal. And I remember saying that to her, and she was like, you're going to feel better. So when that happened, I stayed in bed for 3 days. I wouldn't get out of bed. My wife was super concerned about me, and I would be concerned too. And on the fourth day, I woke up and I sat down at the table and I started writing. So if you read Police Mental Barricade, the first 2 pages read like a journal for a reason.
Yep.
It's because it started out as a journal. And I remember finishing those 2 chapters, and I handed it to my wife and I said, is this stupid? Like, is this just me complaining? And she's like, no, this is a book. Like, you need to finish this. And I wrote Police Mental Barricade in about 5 or 6 days. Every morning I woke up and I sat at the kitchen table and I just typed for hours. And a lot of it was out of anger. I mean, I listened to that book on audio tape when I go away on business, typically a couple of months, a couple of times throughout the year, I listen to it. And sometimes I don't recognize that person. Like, it's reading it is very, very different. And it took me a long time to do Police Mental Barricade too, because I was not in the same headspace. I wasn't
Right.
angry anymore. I had gotten to the point. I took a job with this company that I'm at right now, which I absolutely love, changed my life, and I just wasn't bitter and angry anymore, But what I did was is I felt that it was necessary to write a part two of what happens after you put a book like that out. And the retaliation that I thought I experienced when I was in the department was just the beginning, because the amount of retaliation from my police department because of the first book is unbelievable. And you would never think a law enforcement agency would do something like that. And I discovered through writing that book that I wasn't alone, that there were so many people that emailed me and said, hey, that book resonated with me because my department did the same thing to me. And I started to realize this is a really, really bad issue within our profession, which is the moment you speak up, or if you leave the department not in a way that they like, they will try and stop you from earning in the future. And it happens time and time and time again. And luckily for me, that there were some legal avenues that I can take with the type of retaliation that I experienced. So that's where both of the books came from.
Oh, and I've enjoyed reading both of them. I read volume
Thank
two
you.
twice. I mean, it was,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, no, man, really good work. I'd like to bring up just a few parts of the book, obviously not the whole thing, but a lot of my audience is those interested in the job or
Mhm.
younger officers, and I have the YouTube analytics to prove it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we, I'm more of the hey, I made this mistake, learn from my mistake kind of person, but also
Yeah.
like preventative learning, as in you need to realize that if you're not careful, you can fall into these certain categories of quote leaders. But we know what, and your co-host on the Roll Call Room podcast, Mark, does a good job of saying they're not
Yeah.
leaders, they're toxic
Managers.
managers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So we need to identify some terms here to make people aware, and they need to do everything to prevent ever being that person, because the job is hurting enough as is. Please
Yeah.
don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. So in the chapter titled, well, chapter 2, lead from the front. In quotations, it's lead from the front.
Yeah.
You 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 refer to something as a Napoleon affirmation. Can you dive into that?
Well, the Napoleon affirmation is basically where you lead by dictatorship, fear, and intimidation, and that is a huge character trait of a very, very poor law enforcement leader, which is there's no inclusiveness. There is me on top of a soapbox and pointing my finger in the direction that you need to go, and I don't care what your feedback is. I don't care what your input is. I don't care what your expertise is with dealing with this barricade situation or this domestic or whatever it is. And that has resonated, or that repeats itself a lot in law enforcement, which is the Napoleon complex, which is um, it's a fear of being exposed as a poor leader or not knowing how to handle a situation. And
Yeah, good point.
instead of saying, hey, um, we got this barricade situation. I've never handled anything like this before as a lieutenant or as a sergeant. Anybody here? Anybody here SWAT? Anybody here respond to this location before? Instead of having that moment of clarity, or as some poor leaders call it, moment of weakness, and saying, I don't know, they kind of freeball it. They just kind of go, I think we should handle it this way, and we're going to handle it this way. And it's not just in emergency situations. We see it all over the place, man. We see it every decision that's being made, even in behind closed doors and offices for policies, where you'll have a policy come out and officers are like, who the hell thought of this? And it's because you didn't get any input. Or if you did ask for input, it was just as a checkbox. And that was
Yeah.
infamous in my old department. They would have a committee and they would have officers come on the committee, and the decision was already made. The only reason why we had the committee was so that the person, the captain or the deputy chief, can go to the chief and say, hey, no, we got officer input. We had a committee. That's not input. That's not input. That's an audience. There's a difference between a committee and an audience.
Oh, oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, geez. Oh my. Okay. Well, on the flip side of that, you bring up in the book pioneering leadership. So, can you dive into that?
So pioneering leadership is the one what I talk about, which is that let's take, for example, let's take a recruitment problem. You're the commander of recruitment. You filling up a room with new officers and veteran officers and say, hey, listen, we got a crisis. We don't know what to do. You new folks that are coming onto this department, what's our shortcomings? What turned you off in the first year that you were here or during field training? Okay, now seasoned officers, what are you seeing out on the street, the product that we're putting out after field training? And you take those two and you morph them together and you pioneer a new idea, or you think outside of the box, where you take a chance. You don't do the same recruitment that we've done for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
We go to, and I'll name them real quick. We put a Facebook post up. We're looking for people, and we usually have a video of our officers dancing around and looking like clowns.
Oh, dude, don't even get me started on the lip sync videos. Oh my gosh. Okay.
I got a better one. We have a high speed Martin Scorsese recruitment video with SWAT rappelling down a building. A robot that never gets used, or it gets to the front door of a barricade and breaks down, or nobody charged it. Okay. Or the third one, we go to colleges based on the demographics that we're looking for. We go to colleges where that demographic, this college students, hate our guts, but we're going to go there and we're going to recruit people. Or we go to a mall and we set up a table with a nice tablecloth that's not ironed, and we lay out all these brochures and we try and get people to put in. And then the test day comes and 5 people show up. And then so what we do is next month, when we're thinking about doing a recruiting event, we go, you know what we need to do? We need to put a Facebook post of us acting goofy. We need to put out our high-tech video of SWAT repelling. We need to go to, and they just repeat the same thing over, instead of somebody from recruitment or HR going, hey, we've done that. We've done that for the last 20 years. What can we do differently?
Yeah, we need someone with pioneering leadership.
It's something,
yeah.
man. It baffles my mind, because when folks watch this, every time they see a Facebook post of a high speed recruiting video, they're going to go, oh my God, Scott had this guy Nick on there and he said the same thing. It's always SWAT doing what SWAT does. And in my old agency, they only got called out like 5 times a year, and the problem solved itself by the time they suited up and they got in all their tactical turtle gear. And I was on the incident command team, so the robot team and all that stuff. And by the time we got the robot off the thing, it resolved itself. So you're selling a false narrative. You're selling to prospective people that they're going to be in SWAT right out of field training. Don't lie to them. That's, you're starting off on the bad foot already. So pioneer something different. Dare to be different. I don't know what the apprehensiveness of being in law enforcement is trying something different. I think it's the fear. I think it's the fear of failing.
Man, that's just basic human behavior.
Yes.
I mean, just that's why so many people don't make the podcast or write the book. Just fear of whatever. I mean, it's just, man, fear drives a lot, even on an organizational level.
Yes, and fear does it constantly in law enforcement. I would imagine, like I said before, their identity crisis the majority of their identity crisis comes from that fear.
Yeah, good point.
They're like, I don't want to wind up on another First Amendment auditor video. And I'll take that for example, Scott, if you got a second.
Yeah.
These First Amendment auditor videos, and I've talked about this on my podcast. You watched on TikTok how many times these folks know the law better than some of our cops? They go in a lobby at a post office, or they're in a public area filming, and law enforcement comes up and goes, give me your ID. And they go, no, I'm not doing that. And next thing you know, they're arrested and a big lawsuit happens and everything. Have you ever seen, and I had this conversation with Mark, my co-host, have you ever seen a sergeant or a lieutenant go up to one of these First Amendment auditors and go, you know what? You're doing an absolutely great service for the public. So much so that I want to give you my business card. And if you would allow us to schedule for you to come to our police headquarters and do a roll call training with our officers, I think it would be very educational. I think you should be training our officers. And nobody does that because they're afraid. They're like, I'm not going to partner with that guy. He just goats people. No, he's trying to educate you. There are some of them that just want to get a payout. But the thing is the way to combat that is to go up to them and say, you know what? You want to be a real auditor? Be a trainer. Come to our department and train our officers. Nobody does that. And that's what I would do. Like when I was a sergeant, we didn't have First Amendment auditors come out. It wasn't popular. I'd go up to them and I would hand them my business card and say, you know what? You're absolutely right. I'm going to talk to this officer, but I would love for you to come to our police headquarters and train our folks. Please. It's an open invitation. If they don't do it, they don't do it. But now you're on video. Now you're on a viral video turning around and going, hey, instead of you just being a knucklehead and goading our officers, why don't you step up and be what the change that you want to be?
Yeah.
You don't see it. You don't see it, man.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No, good point. I saw one sergeant on a auditor channel where he said, I watch your channel and I'm glad you're doing that. Yeah. And I'm glad you're doing what you're doing because you're holding police officers accountable. I like that. That was the one video that came to mind, but other than that.
And then it went like this. Then it was my favorite on those is, I understand, I appreciate what you do and you're probably correct, but I would appreciate it if you just kind of stepped off the property and stopped doing what you were doing. And the person's like, no, I'm not doing that. And they're like, yeah, but it would make me feel better. And the First Amendment order is like, I'm not here to make you feel better. It's just, they come close to doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I only bring up the First Amendment order because my old department has been sued 3 times from these First Amendment auditors, and they just don't learn. They perpetually make the same mistakes over and over and over and over.
I hate that. Man.
And you got to adapt. Listen, you got to adapt. If you're not harnessing social media right now and podcasts as a law enforcement agency, you're in the Stone Age. You're an analog clock in a digital age right now. And if you aren't embracing, like Andy Harvey, who's a chief of police in Texas, wrote a book. He's absolutely amazing. I've had him on my show a couple of times. The guy is the police chief, and he started a podcast inside of his own department. Mm-hmm. Who does that? Yeah. You know who does that? A pioneer.
There you go. Amen.
That's who does that. Like, you have to embrace it at some point. Like, the days of you turning around in front of reporters and saying no comment, those days are over.
Oh, wait.
Those days are over. Yeah, and if you don't own Facebook Live as a law enforcement agency, and you don't get in front of Facebook Live and scoop the story from everybody during a homicide or a massive scene, it takes you 2 seconds to go Facebook Live and do this as the police chief. Hey, I'm Chief Ruggiero. Right now, this is where we're at. We're at this scene right here at blah, 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 at Cross Street, blah, blah, blah. So far, this is what we got. We got a call of shots fired here. There is a victim that is deceased. Right now, that's the preliminary information of what I have. I will do another Facebook Live once I have more information. Be safe. End video. Done.
Yeah,
post.
That's it. Like, man, you had great insights there when it came to different ways people could or leaders could approach the whole pioneering thing, and particularly with the First Amendment audits. I really,
that's copyrighted. That's copyrighted. They can't
steal
that.
Yep. There you go. And then if I haven't said it yet, to anyone who has not read the book Police Mental Barricade, one and two. Like, go get them. I mean, more than
Appreciate it.
worth it, and very insightful. But for my audience, which is a lot of younger officers who I'm assuming don't have rank yet, but hopefully will and make a good difference and lead on. You can be a pioneering leader for yourself. You really can. You're not just there to take orders. I'm not saying you're there to argue orders, but take responsibility. And what I liked what you did, Nick, in the second book, once you brought up the responsibility or a person's should be responsible with their social media. I brought this up in 101 Useful Tips for Rookie Police, my last book. In my opinion, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say there's a concerning number of officers, younger officers, who have more TikTok videos than arrests. So let's focus on why you signed up, why you got into it, and be responsible on social media. So please, Nick, you mentioned in the book, please share your insight.
Yeah, I mean, especially now, I think the TikTok era is big and huge now, and I like that analogy. They have more TikTok videos than they do have arrests, and I think particularly there is a TikTok cop movement right now where they don't understand that how they earned that uniform and how many people before have perished protecting the integrity of that uniform.
Wow, yeah, you're right.
And not just your uniform, but the uniform in general as a cop. I think they lose sight that this is not, they don't work at Chick-fil-A. They're not, this is a calling and it's a profession.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big difference between a profession and a job. This isn't your 9 to 5 at Walmart. This is a profession. And, I'm a big advocate for, freedom of expression, but I think it also needs to be in moderation of how you represent yourself. Because like I said in the beginning, which is if you're doing fitness videos and a defense attorney wants to use that fitness video in a homicide trial to show, I don't know where you go with that.
Yeah.
But if you're on TikTok and you're doing these videos where your uniform is half off or it's just really tasteless stuff. It may not be the case, but it is a good argument in court about what your commitment is or your level of maturity. And it doesn't matter when it's, a drunken public. It doesn't matter, a car accident, but it does matter when it turns out to be a serial killer or a murderer. These defense attorneys are going to use everything in their power to discredit the department, and you represent that department. So if I can put you on the stand and show 5 of your TikTok videos of you stripping, that's going to call into question the decision-making ability for that department. And I don't think the younger generation doesn't fully understand it. They equate likes as acceptance. The only acceptance that you need is from the people that you have to work with day in and day out.
Yeah.
And I think some of them have lost focus on that. I think TikTok has been detrimental to our department in a lot of ways. But in the flip side of that, like I said before, is it's stuff that we haven't embraced. TikTok shouldn't just be for a bunch of officers dancing around like idiots as a recruitment video. It can be used in a way that is a positive light for law enforcement. And I don't think we're even scratching the surface for that, or social media in general for law enforcement.
Oh, yeah. No, I say if a department doesn't have an active Twitter feed, Instagram feed, Facebook feed, whatever, if they don't have active social media, they're wrong, like flat out wrong right now. Because what's the best way to get instant communication? It's not through, well, we'll wait for a scheduled interview with the local news station at 5 o'clock. Man, people don't watch that as much as they used to. Come on. It's social media because people need instant information. And their attention spans aren't going to watch a 30-minute news segment with a bunch of different stories waiting for that one story about your police department to appear. And I agree. We can use social media for good. Like I do my best, even though I'm a former police officer now. I use it to encourage cops as much as possible. And you do the same, as well as calling out what needs to be called out, which is the toxicity that can really be damaging to an officer, in addition to the stress, demands, and trauma they already face externally out there while responding to calls. For those who maybe were ticked off saying, TikTok, ticked off. Anyway, for those saying, wait, no, you didn't just call me out for making videos on TikTok. No, 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 no. Look. Just, I'm not saying stop making your TikTok videos, but at least make sure they're tasteful and then put them towards good use. And I think you'll agree with me on this, Nick. We really have to make sure the younger officers understand you're making more of an impact with someone you personally encounter in the public versus 1,000 people who see a video or more and they watch it. And in the moment, they're like, oh, yeah, that was cool. But then they move on with their life to the next video. Like, make your focus the people that call 911 or the people that need the officer's help, that kind of thing. And you'll make a bigger impact that way than you will some TikTok video or focusing on that.
Yeah. And I think in the moment when you're making these videos, you're not thinking long game, which that's a chapter in my book, which is the long game of your career.
Yeah.
If this is a 2-3 year job for you or a 4 or 5 year job, and it's a way for you to hook up with males or females while you're on the job, you know what? That's your long game. You know, if that's your long game, then play your long game. But if you're in this to win it and you're in it for the longevity and you're in this to make a career, don't be surprised 10 years from now when you go for a promotional exam and nobody on that panel takes you seriously because you were dancing around with your underwear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a double standard. Don't turn around and be upset about that. If you want people to respect you, if you want people to respect the work that you do, the product that you put out is what they respect.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a stigma that you're going to have to stay with. And you and I have seen it in departments. I've seen recruits get into a lot of trouble, male and female, where they get a reputation while they're a recruit. And then 5-10 years down the road, they're scratching their head and they're trying to figure out why they're not getting promoted or why they're not getting in specialized units. It's because the powers that be that pick and choose where you go in specialized units and promotions, remember that stuff. Remember your maturity level. They remember that while you're a recruit, you know, you serviced more people than 7-Eleven. I mean, that's a stigma that you're going to have to get that you're going to have to work over. I'm facetious in the sense, but it's true because it happens in every department. Yeah. I'm sure 5 people that are listening to this when you put it out, 5 people are going to go, oh, I could name one person right now that's like that in my department. But then that's the same person in 5 years that's suing the department for discrimination or, you know, they didn't get this promotion or whatever. Listen, you got to look inward. You got to look at your long game. Stop looking at the short game. And I think the type of caliber that we're hiring right now, we're hiring not all of them, a good percentage of them have a big maturity problem, a big maturity problem. I think that they like the idea of wearing this uniform. I think it looks cool. It makes nice videos and, you know, it's popular, but are you going to be in the stack when I'm fighting for my life? I would venture to say no. I'm going to venture to say that you're not going to be able to defend yourself, which then in turn, now I have to defend you and I'm going to put my life on the line because you were too busy making TikTok videos instead of being in the gym.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, man, you hit the nail on the head right there. And like I said, to anyone making these TikTok videos, look, if you've already put some silly ones out there, yeah, sure. Okay. Take them down or whatever, but still just people can change. So, I mean, it's not like, you know, we're saying that your career's over or something like that, but just constantly evaluate how you're doing. And speaking about how you're doing, and you talked about the long game, Nick, for those who are in it, I mean, heck, all it can take is that one call to shake someone emotionally, or just the bad experiences of not feeling led and feeling like they're on their own. To wrap it up, you've been there where you felt so much pain that you thought the only way out of that pain was to kill yourself. And unfortunately, many police officers are there right now. And we don't know who's going to listen to this podcast or watch this video. We don't know. But since you've been there and you had a plan and you had plastic on your mattress or wherever it was, I can't remember from the first book. Yeah, you were going to go through with it. What do you say to have them snap out of it and to come out of that dark place and realize there's other ways to get out of pain? And on the other side of that pain is success you never thought possible.
So my whole thing now and what I preach is the 24-hour rule. If you're thinking about it, give it 24 hours, but within that 24 hours, it's not a waiting game. It's not you just convincing yourself to not do it or to do it. The 24 hours is to get you in front of somebody to talk to them. And if you can get your story out to them and you can convince them that that's the best option for you, you probably need to check in somewhere. You need some in counseling. You need some overnight counseling. My thing is, and this is from experience, from learning, is I wish that when I took the job that I started to see a therapist, even if it was for once a month.
Yeah.
And I think where we don't talk about that in the academy or talk about it in general is there's still that stigma. Getting counseling means I've got a problem. Getting counseling means this. If I could go back and go do it again, I would have seen a counselor at least once a month. And I've been on podcasts before where folks, a couple of hosts are like, counseling doesn't work. I've tried to talk to people. It doesn't work because you're not finding the right counselor, the right
Exactly.
therapist.
Yeah.
You have to therapy shop. I was fortunate. The first one I got specialized in law enforcement, trauma, and PTSD. I was very fortunate.
Yeah.
I recognize that that's not the case everywhere. Mm-hmm. The thing about it is there are other forms of therapy. Your podcast, my podcast, The Shield Within. All these different podcasts is a form of therapy for 30 minutes to a half an hour. Put on a pair of headphones and listen. But nothing fixes anything like talking to somebody, whether or not it's a counselor, a loved one, friend, buddy. Do buddy checks. Turn around and do buddy checks. I'd like to say that from 2019 to now that we've gotten a lot better with the stigma of law enforcement suicide. No, it if anything, it's gotten worse because now we're in an epidemic of the hatred towards police officers. So the stress is super high and people are thinking about ending their lives because they soaked 15, 20 years into this profession and they're watching it go down the tubes. I was there. I mean, like I said, I did 5 years NYPD, then I came down to Virginia. And I soaked my whole entire profession in this. My kids were babies when I started this profession. And when I got kicked out, they were teenagers, almost past teenagers. And so to me, the depression was, look at all the time that I wasted. Mm-hmm. I thought that this job was going to be the payoff. I thought I was going to have a pension for the rest of my life. And all these days that I miss, all this stuff. You got so many people that are like that right now. They're stuck. They can't leave, but they can't stay. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
I got 5 more years left and then I can punch out. But how much of a life are you going to have in the next 5 years? Like you gotta equate what, is the juice worth the squeeze kind of thing. And I think for me, everything revolves around therapy and you'll never convince me otherwise that therapy isn't the option. You just got to find the right one. I mean, I wish that there was a network, and this is probably a great idea for a company, whoever is out there, throw me some money. Having an app or a website that you go on that has former law enforcement or current law enforcement that are certified therapists, and you go on there and you talk to them. And if that one doesn't work for you, pick another one. Mm-hmm. Just picking another one until you get it. But understand something. After a while of you going through all of these people, maybe it's not them. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're not ready to receive. You're just ready to give, but you're not ready to receive any information, or you just don't like what you're hearing. And I'll tell you from my experience with my therapist right after trying to do it, was I didn't like some of the stuff was coming out of her mouth. But looking back on it now, I needed to hear that. I needed to hear, hey, listen, suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah.
It isn't going to change. What that chief did to me, 3 years ago, that's nothing I could do about it now. I can't change it. I can't change the way. I mean, I have so many what ifs. Like, what if I would have done this? What if I would have said this? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So for me, the therapy is doing podcasts, listening to folks like you, writing books, reading books. There's so many great books out there that talk about that stuff. So that's my big, huge advice.
Yeah, no, I'm very glad you said all of that. Very dynamic. And for people who want to learn more about how you can help them or your podcast, your books, please point them in the right direction.
Yeah. So you can check us out on rollcallroom.com, available on all podcast platforms. You can go on Amazon, just type in my name, Nicholas Ruggiero, or Police Mental Barricade, and then all of my books will pop up. I also have study guides on there for promotional processes, detective process, all these different things. You can also reach out to me individually at nick@rollcallroom.com.